Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about a tool that has completely transformed the way I plan and navigate my hikes, AllTrails Plus. As a Trailheads Ambassador and the organizer of the Yakima Valley Trekkers, I'm out on the trails a lot. One of my favorite features of AllTrails Plus is the ability to edit and create my own maps. Conditions change, fallen trees, washed out sections, or even a last-minute reroute. And with AllTrails Plus, I can adjust my route on the fly and share it with others so everyone stays informed and safe. AllTrails Plus also gives you offline maps, wrong turn alerts, and 3D trail previews to help you stay on track and make the most of your adventure. And the best part, you can get 30% off an AllTrails Plus membership with my exclusive link in the episode show notes. So whether you're planning your next big trek or just looking for a new trail to explore, AllTrails Plus has you covered. Check it out and let's hit the trail. Welcome to Season 14 of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host, Ivan, and each week we're hitting the trails through conversations with extraordinary hikers from across the United States and beyond. Spring has a way of pulling us back out there. Muddy boots, wildflowers pushing through the thaw, and trails that feel brand new, even when we've walked them 100 times before. There's something electric about this season. When the days stretch longer, the snowpack starts its slow retreat, and the mountains finally say, "Come on up." This season, I've had the privilege of sitting down with hikers whose stories carry the same sense of renewal, of fresh starts, new summits, and the kind of momentum that only comes when you've been waiting all winter to lace up and go. From early season ridge walks and creek crossings swollen with snowmelt to the quiet joy of watching the landscape wake up mile by mile, the voices you'll hear this season remind us that the trail is always calling. You just have to answer. So shake off the cabin fever, air out the pack, and get ready. Season 14 is here, and the conversations ahead are as alive, layered, and full of possibility as a Pacific Northwest spring. 700 plus miles, alone, dragging a sled across Antarctica, with nothing but training, grit, and the kind of stubbornness that makes history. On January 18th, 2026, Monet Izabeth made history, skiing solo and unsupported across 700 plus miles of Antarctic ice to the South Pole. The wild part, 3 years before that, she had never once slept outside in the winter. In this week's episode, Monet traces the full, unlikely arc from being dragged on hikes as a kid who wanted nothing to do with the outdoors, to a jaw-dropping Facebook message about her great-uncle's World War II plane found on Mount Kenya, to a brutal polar shakedown in Svalbard that left her thinking, "Damn it, now I have to do it." We go deep on what a goal this size actually demands, over $89,000 just for the expedition itself, 2.5 years of all-consuming physical and mental training, and a decision to bet her own savings when sponsors wouldn't take the leap. We also get into the mental game of hauling a sled across a frozen continent alone, her philosophy on summits, and why she'd rather have you have fun than bag a peak, gear hot takes, tea house trekking in Nepal, and what's coming next. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Monet Izabeth. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really exciting guest with me today who's going to be sharing about her amazing experience earlier this year in 2026. Her name is Monet Izabeth, and she's going to be sharing about her personal hiking and expedition experiences. Thank you so much, Monet, for coming on the podcast. We always like to start off by having our guests share a little bit about themselves and how they got hiking or with the outdoors.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I used to hate hiking so much. Maybe people can relate to that or not, but I was like never an athletic kid, and hiking was always something I was sort of dragged along to do. I really started getting into it in my 20s. I took a gap year after high school before I went to college, and I did a little bit of backpacking there, but it was really in my 20s doing trips with my best friend from home, who is a thru hiker who just recently triple crowned, which is very exciting. But she really introduced me to hiking, and then that sort of opened up my world to the outdoor adventure world.
And you did something really incredible on January 18th. And I was kind of sharing before we started recording that one of our previous guests, Anastasia Allison from Kula Cloth, was sharing that you were almost going to reach your destination when we recorded with her. Can you share about that special accomplishment that happened on January 18th?
Oh, yeah. So on January 18th, 2026, I became the first American woman to ski solo and unsupported to the South Pole, which is probably a shocking thing to say after I just said I hate hiking, or I hated hiking and I was never athletic. Because this was a massive feat of endurance that I accomplished that still feels surreal, but it's been a big journey to reach that point.
What an amazing accomplishment. And I think what was really great to read and learn about your experience is that 3 years ago, you hadn't winter camped prior to this expedition. And I'm curious to know, like, what shifted in your life that made you start saying yes to some of these, I guess, quote unquote, extreme expeditions?
I had like a story of a lifetime drop into my lap about 10 years ago in 2016. At that point, I was doing professional photography and videography for nonprofits, and I was heading more towards wanting to be a documentary filmmaker. I liked taking on adventure and stories, but it was sort of centered around women and girls and in the nonprofit sector, like sort of social emotional learning. And then in the summer of 2016, I got a Facebook message from a stranger telling me that my great uncle's plane had been found on Mount Kenya at 10,000 feet. And I thought it was obviously a scam at first. It sounds like complete craziness, but it ended up being true. My great uncle had gone missing during World War II while he was on a routine training mission in Kenya. My great uncle was South African. My father is also South African. And I had known that he had gone missing during World War II, but that's just sort of like a story you hear as a kid, and you kind of think that's the end of the story. You never think there's going to be more to it. But this email that I received was from a woman who was working with the Commonwealth War Graves Association, and they were trying to reach next of kin. They were trying to reach my father, but I had a much bigger online presence than my father does. So they found me first, and they were looking for permission to bring remains off of the mountain from the crash site of the plane if they found any. And my father, who was my biggest fan at the time, said to me, you have to ask them if you can go with them, and you have to film the entire thing. And I was like, this is crazy. I'm 26 years old. I had done nothing. I was like, there's no way they're going to let me go. But he was like, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life if you don't ask. So I emailed them and I asked, a couple weeks later, for whatever reason, they said yes, that I could go. But it was definitely sort of like a situation where like, you can come, but we're not going to be holding your hand through it. And so I went to Kenya and I joined this British Army military expedition. I had done some hiking, but nothing like that. This was off the grid, cutting our way through bamboo forest, no trail. And it was so difficult, so hard, so dramatic. And when all of that was over, I was like, I don't know what that was, but I want to do that for the rest of my life. And so that's what I tried to do.
And I got to ask, like, how long did it take you from, say, the point when you got out of the vehicle to then coming across your great uncle's plane crash?
Since then, I've been up to the plane crash 5 times. So now I know it quite well. But that first time when we went up there, we actually really didn't know where the location was. What had happened was the plane had been found actually in 2002. And then the British Army had sort of like put all the documents in a box. And then the box got lost. And so all they were going off of in 2016, after like 14 years of bureaucracy, was a pinhole in a map that had been hanging on someone's wall. And the bamboo is so thick up there that you could be 10 feet away from the plane crash, you will not be able to see it. So when we were going up, we had this pinhole that we were going to search around the pinhole. We were slower going up than we thought we were going to be because the group ended up being 12 people and I was the only woman. And we camped one night. So we hiked for maybe, 7 or 8 hours, camped. And then the next morning we had a turnaround time of 11 a.m. if we hadn't found water or the plane, because the mountain was a lot drier than we thought it was going to be. And at 11 a.m. we hadn't found water or the plane. So we were turning around. And our Captain Tomo Thompson, he was basically, we were either going to go left left and forge a new path down the mountain, or go right and have to go like retrace our steps north a bit and then go back down the mountain. And he decided to go left. And because of that sort of fluke decision, 10 minutes later, we walked into the plane crash, like a total fluke. So I guess it took us a day and a half to find the plane. And then it took us the next day. By the point we started hiking back down the next day, we were out of food. And so we had plenty of water though, because the military helicopter came and shoved these jugs of water out of a helicopter for us, which no, I was never supposed to tell anyone because it was illegal or something. But I think 10 years have passed. I think it's okay if I talk about it. But we didn't have any food left. So on that last day, I was very hungry, and we what was supposed to take maybe 4 or 5 hours hike down ended up taking us over 12 hours, and we ended up hiking in the dark without having eaten all day. And it was a really tough day to get back down because that bamboo is so thick. So it was just like a real fly by the seat of my pants adventure. And I didn't know how I was going to ever find that thrill again, but I knew I wanted to.
With this adventure, kind of planting the seed, was there a series of events or a moment where Antarctica first kind of came into the spotlight for you and maybe piqued your interest in doing?
So it's a couple different things that I sort of see as threads coming together at the right time. One of them was that when I was in college, I'd taken a literature course called Exploring the Poles, where we just read exploring history and books about the North and the South Pole. And that was just the best class that I took all throughout college and really introduced me to reading about exploring history, which I love. I didn't think at that time, oh, one day I'm going to go, I'm going to go on an expedition to the South Pole. But then later on, after I'd done the Mount Kenya expeditions, I was searching for, and I'd done some other things. I had a travel series with Matador Network for a while. I was looking for a bigger expedition or goal to take on that I could really sink my teeth into and train for several years. That was the sort of vague idea that I had. I didn't know what it was going to be, and I didn't want to force anything. A goal that large, you have to really want it to go after it. And so I was just sort of being open to the universe sending me ideas or sending me something that I thought I would want to do. And then in January of 2022, I saw the news that Preet Chandi had become the first woman of color to ski solo and unsupported to the South Pole. And when I saw that news, my first thought was that's the coolest thing I've ever heard. I did not know that was possible. But of course, I could never do that because I've never winter camped, I barely know how to ski, and I've never been to Antarctica. And so I just immediately shoved it out of my mind as something that wasn't meant for me, but it was super cool and I couldn't stop reading about it. And I kept reading Preet's interviews. And as I read her interviews, every single time she would say in the interview, 3 years ago, I'd never winter camped. I didn't know how to ski. I didn't even know where Antarctica was. And I was like, what? How is that possible? And as I looked into it more and more, I learned that it was something that you really could train for. And the seed was planted in my mind and I could not stop thinking about it. And I just realized that it was fear of just trying to do the thing that was holding me back. So at that point, I was like, okay, it'd been maybe 6 or 7 months since Preet had finished. I was like, I need to dip my toes in the world of polar expeditions and either put this thing to rest or really take on this goal. So I just Googled polar expedition training, and this American company popped up called Polar Explorers. And they have something they called a shakedown training, a polar shakedown, I think is the term for it. And they do it in Minnesota, and they do it in Svalbard, which is Norway's island by the Arctic. I signed up for the one in Svalbard, being basically, if I don't like it, at least I get to go to Svalbard. And if I do like it, then I got to go to Svalbard as well. So I did this training course with Polar Explorers in Svalbard, and we had crazy weather. That was when I winter camped for the first time in Svalbard with Polar Explorers. We were out for 2 nights. It was fucking freezing. And we were in a whiteout, hiding behind a barn, eating our snacks while the wind was just hurricane force going by. And I loved it. And when I told the guides what I was thinking of, because they want to help you sort of achieve your goals. And also they want to know, why did you sign up for this training course? I sort of said to them, shaking in my boots, I am thinking about maybe that I want to ski to the South Pole. And I really thought that they might laugh at me because they knew I had no experience. But they took me super seriously. And I remember them, they didn't laugh. They didn't crack a smile. They said, 100% you can do it. You have to train for it. It's going to take you years. It's going to be hard, but you can 100% do it. And then I was like, damn it, now I have to do it.
And you invested, quite a bit of time training. I think it was over 2 years. You also made a substantial financial investment. What did the commitment require for you, either mentally or financially, when you, decided I'm going to do this?
Everything I had. That is what it required. It was huge. It was a massive, even now that it's over, it's still a huge part of my life. From when I did Svalbard, it was 2.5 years before I went down to Antarctica. And I thought about the expedition. I thought about training for it every single day for those 2.5 years. The physical training was all consuming. The expedition training was all consuming. And then the financial, requirement for it was massive. So just the South Pole expedition itself was about $89,000. That does not include gear, equipment, plane tickets to get down to South America. So that's massive. And I knew I needed to get that money or find a way to get it in the years while I was training for it. And then on top of that, I had to do smaller expeditions, which also are expensive. Nothing about polar expeditions is cheap. And really, you don't want to be out there on the cheap stuff. It's like, that's not when you want to have cheap stuff with you. All of the gear is expensive. The training is expensive. It's an expensive arena to be playing in. I just decided that the goal was worth it. I tried really hard to get sponsors, but, I honestly think that no one really thought I was going to be able to do it. I mean, in terms of sponsors, I had people in my life who knew I could do it and were rooting me on. But in terms of like sponsors who held the money and the keys to finances, I think it was kind of hard to take a chance on someone like me who didn't have a background in polar expeditions saying, oh, no, but I'm going to ski solo to the South Pole and I'm going to be the first American woman to have done it. And I just couldn't find a sponsor. So at some point I had to make a decision, like, is this important enough to me that I'm going to put my own savings into it? And it was. I just decided, I'm like, I have the money. This is what you save it up for, is to do something worthwhile. I don't own a house. I'm not married. I don't have kids. This is I sort of said to like my mom, and I was like, this is like I'm getting married. I'm getting married to Antarctica. This is my wedding. Some people pay this much for a wedding. I'm paying this much to go to Antarctica. I started a GoFundMe, which did get like a good chunk of cash from that. And I started fundraising by selling expedition patches. So I had these patches made for my expedition. I had them sewed onto my gear, and I'm still selling them through my GoFundMe up until this moment now, trying to sort of reap back some of the logistical costs of the expedition.
And Monet, can anybody donate on the GoFundMe as of right now?
Anybody. Anybody can. Yeah, if you want a patch, you donate $100 or more to my GoFundMe, and then you send me your mailing address. You can send it to me on Instagram or my email or my website. There's like a million different ways to get in touch with me, and I will send you a patch.
And we'll be sure to put that in the episode show notes so people can check it out. Now, Monet, I think, a lot of us, and especially when this episode comes out, are gearing up for the summer hiking season, whether it's backpacking, accessing backcountry spots. And I feel like spring brings a lot of people into that training mode. And I'm curious, for this expedition, what other training or solo trips did you do in order to prepare for it?
Yeah, so I had to do 3 expeditions in order to qualify to go down to Antarctica solo. 2 of those were solo expeditions. I did 1 week solo in northern Minnesota in the Boundary Waters, and I did a 2-week solo in Norway in Finsen, the Hardangervidda Plateau. And then I also had to do a guided group expedition. So I crossed Greenland, which was a massive thing. Like, it was a 30-day expedition that I had to do just in order to qualify to go down to Antarctica. And it was interesting because every part of my training ended up sort of being like, all of my training, like expedition training, was this momentous, like, this is the longest, biggest thing I've ever done. And I'm doing it in order to like qualify for the longest, biggest thing I will have ever done. But yeah, there was a lot of training. And then the physical training training. I was training 6 times a week or 5 to 6 times a week for over 2 years, doing like strength training, pulling tires. I had these 2 tires that I pulled, for up to 5 hours at a time to mimic pulling a sled on the expedition. And then I would do that wherever I was in the world. I had 3 sets of tires depending on what country I was in to train for it.
And I'm glad you mentioned Minnesota because I believe that was the first time you were skiing solo and an incident did happen there. Can you share with the listeners a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, so that was one of my, like, if I could go back and do things differently, I would take baby steps. I'm not good at taking baby steps. I'm like a jump in the deep end sometimes kind of person. So for Minnesota, I had done my I'd done my sort of like dip my toe in Svalbard 8 or 9 months earlier. And the next thing I was going to do, because that is what I decided, was I was going to do a week-long solo expedition in Minnesota, having never solo winter camped before. The only winter camping I'd done were those 2 nights out in Svalbard with Polar Explorers. So I get to Minnesota and I was really nervous. Like, there was no excitement. It was just like I might vomit nerves. I'm so tied up inside about this expedition, about my training. Everyone had sort of said to me, like, I was stressing out about the fact that I was going to be skiing over frozen lakes. And everyone I'd spoken to, I said, don't worry about that. Minnesota is like the Arctic in February. There's so much snow. The ice is so thick. You're not even going to know that you're skiing on a lake. You're going to have no idea. And I'm like, okay. The week I get to Minnesota, it's a heat wave. It's 40 degrees. It is raining. And I'm like, okay. Well, I think I might know that I'm on a lake now. All of the snow is melted. There's nothing. So I get to the lake. I like leading up to this I had another training the week before with Polar Explorers in Minnesota. And I'd been introduced to this woman, Nancy, who works at the Forest Service department. And I had asked her a million questions, like, what do I do if I fall through the ice? What should I like? And she had helped me out. And she was like, listen, it's probably not going to happen, but here's an axe. You can test the ice with this axe. So I had an axe strapped to my sled. I looked like a badass, but I had no idea what I was doing. At least that's how it felt. And so I get out there. I have my first day. It looks like I might as well be water skiing. There's so much meltwater on the lake. I'm pulling my sled. I'm terrified every step is going to be my last because I don't really have enough information about what I'm doing. But I'm also like really stubborn and hard-headed sometimes. And I'm like, I came out here to do my solo and I'm going to go do my solo. I don't care if like the ice is thin. I'll be fine. I'll figure it out. Like, even if I have to just camp on the edge and just hike through the woods around the lake, I'll do that. But after the first day, I realized there was like a dog sledder out in the middle of the lake. Like, I was like, oh, obviously the lake is thicker than I'm thinking. It's fine. And that night, the temperature dropped below freezing. So it was going to be about 18 degrees Fahrenheit for the rest of the week. I was like, I'm good. So the next day, I wake up, it's freezing, it's great. I'm much more confident. I spend the whole day skiing across the lake. It's great. I'm testing the ice where I want to. I like have my ice legs on and I like feeling really good and much more confident. And at the end of the second day, I'm just to the far side of a lake when I fall through the ice. And it happened so fast. I mean, of course it happens fast. It's like you're there and then suddenly you are whoosh through the ice. Luckily, I was close to the shore, so I fell into the ice like up to my belly button, but it's cold, it's freezing, and you now have to try to get out. I literally heard Nancy, the forest ranger's voice in my head when I fell through the ice because I sort of had like a millisecond where I tried to go forward, and then I heard her telling me, if you fall through the ice, turn around and get out the way that you fell in, like the side from where you were coming, because you know that ice is thick enough to hold you. So I like whipped around, and within seconds, I was sort of like lying like a dead bug on my back out of the water with my feet and my hands up in the air. And then the problem is I'm sopping wet and it's 18 degrees Fahrenheit. And so then I knew, because of my training, I knew exactly where my spare clothes were in my sled. So I just got butt naked on the ice immediately, changed into dry clothes, And probably within like 45 seconds of falling through the ice, that's what it felt like. I was like out and in dry clothes. And then I had the issue that my boots that I was wearing were blocks of ice, like they just completely frozen. And so I put on my camp booties, like these fleece booties that I had, and just like strapped them into my skis, which luckily I was able to do, and had to ski using those until I could get back out to the parking lot. But I ended up having to do the next day. I like found a campsite, cried myself to sleep that night. The next day, strapped my camp booties into my skis again, skied for 5 hours to the parking lot. And then Nancy met me there with home-baked cookies, hot chocolate, and like 5 pairs of boots to choose from. And then I went back out and I finished my solo.
That is an amazing... Wow. I mean, that's good to know, because I think for a lot of people, that first instinct is just to like lunge forward. But
no, yeah, it's like the number one thing. Yeah, you should always turn around and come back out the way that you came, and then get into dry clothes as soon as possible.
I mean, props to you you were definitely prepared for the situation, because like you said, within an instant, you were out of the water in dry clothes and, avoiding hypothermia and those type of conditions. That's incredible.
I mean, I also think like just for me, it was terrifying that had happened to me, but I learned like one of the most important lessons that I could learn in polar expedition training, which is that the thing you are most afraid of can come true, and you can get through it and to the other side. And sometimes it might not be as bad as you thought. Like really, like once I fell through the ice, it was okay. It wasn't so bad. My training kicked in. I was able to like handle it in a good way. And I had a support team, that was able to help me figure it out. But it was something like with polar expeditions, the only thing guaranteed is that things will go wrong normally. And that you just have to know you have the skills within your sled, within your training, within your brain to figure out how to deal with the situation.
And I'm glad you mentioned your support system, because you have an unbelievable coach, and I'm hoping you can share a little bit about him to the listeners, and what role did he play in getting you down to the South Pole?
Yeah, shout out to John of E3 Coaching. So John also coached Preet on her first expedition. So it was very cool to connect with him and for him to take me on for my South Pole dreams. He's based out of Scotland, and we worked remotely. I've actually never met him before, and we'll hopefully be meeting him in person for the first time at the end of this month after working together for, over 2.5 years. But so he just like, for me, I had no idea how to train for this. I'm not a professional athlete. I've never done anything of this sort. And I just wanted to take the load off of mentally of like, what do I do every day? I already knew like, I'm going to have to make the decision to train every day. I don't also want to be sort of weighing like, am I doing this right? Am I pulling long enough? I just needed help from someone who knew so much more than me about this. John did exactly that. He gave me my workouts every single week. I knew exactly what I was going to do. And then we would sort of like talk and debrief about how things were going, how it felt. And he was just so understanding and like not a hard ass about it, which I feel like people think that because of what I've done, I must be a really intense person, or I must like, be some sort of insane badass who does these things. I'm not. I'm like the laziest active person you've ever met. I can sit on the couch for 3 days straight and not feel any guilt about it whatsoever. And so I don't want to be working with someone who is like going to be using scare tactics to get me to do the things I need to do. And when I was sick, John would be like, "You're sick. Stop trying to work out. Just take, if you take off 2 weeks right now to get healthy, that's going to be better than, trying to work out and then, harming yourself or hurting yourself and suffering for it down the line." He was just really rational and just like a wonderful, flexible person to work with. And that's sort of having like someone that I was being held accountable by was really important for such a long-term goal, where it is so much more about consistency than, intensity. When you're training for an endurance thing like this, it was much more important that I was training at least a little bit for 2.5 years rather than sort of spurts of intensity.
Yeah, shout out to Coach John. And I'm so looking forward that you're going to get a chance to meet him here at the end of the month. I'm really excited to see that. Now, Monet, I feel like in situations that you're about to embark on an adventure, whether for thru hikers, it's visiting, the southern terminus at the CDT, ADT, or PCT. Can you take us back to when the plane leaves you alone on the edge of Antarctica? What were your first thoughts? What were some of the things that stick out for you, even up to this day?
Yeah, that was a wild moment. I had thought, I had a lot of time leading up to my expedition to wonder what that was going to feel like. It was impossible not to have expectations for how I was going to feel. None of my expectations were true. It was very strange. For the final maybe 3-4 weeks heading into Antarctica, I was super emotional. I'd put so much into the expedition, so much into training, so much money into the expedition. There was just a lot riding on this for me. And I was like crying. I would think about, oh my gosh, this big dream. It's actually going to come true. I'm actually heading to Antarctica. It's real. I have a ticket. It's going to happen. And they would just bring tears to my eyes. By the time I reached Antarctica, I had 3 days or so at a camp in Antarctica to prep before I actually got flown to the start point in Antarctica. And that last day when I was heading to the plane, I was sobbing. I was hugging people goodbye. Tears were like careening down my face. And then as soon as I got on the airplane, it was like, go mode. Like, this is day one of the expedition. I had read how other people had reacted. I talked to other people who had gone through the expedition, and sort of like the fear, or like Felicity Aston, who was the first woman, perhaps the first person to ski across Antarctica. She collapsed crying once the plane left her all alone in Antarctica. So I was expecting something similar because I'd been so emotional up to that point. But instead, the plane ride, it had been perfect blue sky weather at the camp we had started at. And it was just a 20-minute plane ride to the expedition start point. And in those 20 minutes, the wind picked up, and that plane ride ended up being so bumpy, so stomach dropping, that by the time we landed, I was like, I am going to vomit all over this plane. So I didn't feel anything about nerves. It was just like deep breaths. Please do not vomit before the expedition has even begun. And then once the plane had landed and the doors opened, the wind was gusting so intensely that it was like, all I could think about was like, I need to get my face totally covered. I need to get my chest-mounted compass on. I need to get all these things prepared that I was sort of thinking I was going to have time in nice weather to prepare on the ice. And now it's like, There were other people on the plane with me who just sort of like came for fun for the drop-off. I was like, could you hold my compass? Could you hold my gloves? Could you hold my hat? Like, everyone needs to be holding something, because if you let it go, the wind is just going to and we will never see it again. And then the pilot was just like, okay, so if you just want to ski over there, we'll take off. And I was like, okay. So like I battle through the wind to a place like far enough away so that I'm not going to get run over by the plane. I watch the plane like take off in these high winds. It does this really crazy dip. And honestly, I was just thinking, thank God I don't have to get back on that plane, because I would have absolutely vomited all over the ride home. Instead, I just have to ski south for, 57 days. But it was really like, I thought I was going to be scared. I thought I was going to be nervous. I thought all these things, all these emotions that I had gone through prior to the start of the expedition. But instead, partially because of the high winds, they just like completely zeroed in my focus, so that I was like, okay, I just have to start skiing. That's all I have to do right now is just start skiing. And I really felt like I've never been more focused in my entire life on something. And I really felt it. Day one was like, we are in it now, and we need to be focused and in it 150% until we reach the South Pole.
And,
This does make me sound intense, but I swear I'm not.
you locked in when it counted, right? Like it was when you were there. And you said 57 days, you skied nearly 700 miles, and you were pulling, I believe, 250 pounds through sub-zero temperatures. I think I was reading -40 temps, and the brutal winds continued throughout your expedition. Looking back at it, and I know you're probably still processing the expedition, but are there moments that still stick out as, being some of the hardest things that you had to encounter, whether it was physically or mentally?
Yeah. I mean, the expedition was the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. It was mentally was absolutely harder than physically, and physically was incredibly hard. But the mental game of how difficult the expedition is, because I think for me, the mental is harder because you have the physical, which is difficult. I had trained and I was prepared for the physical part, and I had trained mentally for it as well. But I feel like the mental becomes an added thing to whatever you're physically going through, because it's like every single day of the expedition is hard. It never gets easier. And then you know that you have so many more days of that to come, and it's not going to get easier. And so it just becomes, it's the mental fortitude that I had to summon to make it through the expedition was insane. We had really terrible weather, not necessarily any worse than weather anyone else has, but I have heard from people since the expedition ended that they think that with climate change, the weather in Antarctica is less stable. And so while it used to be more, you would have sunnier blue skies, harder snow, it's now much more common that you have sort of this foggy, bad weather, more storms, and softer snow, which is killer when you're trying to pull a sled through it. And because my expedition was unsupported, that means that I started with everything I needed for the entire expedition from day one. That's why I was carrying over 250 pounds of gear and food. And for me, some real tough moments were what I called the doldrums, which were about day 20 to day 30, partially because you're far from the beginning when it was things were still new and exciting. For the first 2 weeks, time flew by. It was I couldn't believe how fast it was going. Day 20 to 30, I couldn't believe how slow time was moving. It was impossible. It felt like every day, seemed to just inch by, and they weren't collecting as quickly as they were, for the first 2 weeks. For every day, it was well, I might have 30 more days. I might have 35 more days. You don't really know exactly how long it's going to take. And those days we had horrible weather and whiteouts. And in the whiteouts, which are mentally really, really tough, it's really hard, for all the hikers out there who are listening, it's so hard to understand what it's like to be in a situation where you have no visual clues. So in Antarctica, in the Arctic, there's no trees. The mountains are very far away. When you can see them, it's just on a clear day. And when you have a whiteout, you see absolutely zero. You see nothing. Everything is white. There's no contrast. And it's basically the same as trying to walk in a straight line with your eyes closed. And we had days and days of that, where I would be skiing for 10 hours, 11 hours, not able to see the entire time. And everyone has their own ways of dealing with it and how to navigate in a situation like that. For me, what I figured out worked best was, I have this chest-mounted compass, so I could look at my compass without hands. And basically what I would do is set my bearing for the day. And then I would ski 8 steps, and I would literally count to 8. And then I would look down at my compass. I couldn't look down at my compass all the time because it jumps around enough that you'll just end up going too zigzag. But also I would literally just hurt my neck if I was looking down like that all the time. And so I would take 8 steps, quickly look down at my compass, see where I was in relation to where I was supposed to be. And I would almost, 9 times out of 10, I would be off course after 8 steps. It's impossible. My body thinks I'm going straight and it's not. And then I would correct course and then do it again. 8 steps, look, 8 steps, look. And I did that for 10, 11 hours a day. And that's so tiring and so exhausting. And that's your only option. You just have to do that. And you don't know if tomorrow is going to be better weather. It's probably not. It's probably not going to be better weather. And even if the weather clears, by the time the weather cleared, we had soft snow to deal with for 3 or 4 more days, maybe even 5 days of soft snow before the snow hardened. It's really just one foot in front of the other. And I had a lot of sort of phrases that I would repeat to myself over and over throughout days. One of them was, plugging away wins the day. There were some days where I just said that out loud to myself, for hours on end, just to motivate myself to keep going.
That just shows the training and resilience that you have. And I know that, the years of training leading up to that point was a big factor in your success. I do want to ask, was there a moment where you truly thought maybe I won't finish, whether it was because of weather or maybe your body was reacting in a way that you hadn't previously experienced?
I never let myself think I might not finish. But there were moments where I was like, oh, I wonder if this is going to be the reason something goes wrong. I had a really horrible fungal infection in my crotch from day one, which was like the worst situation. It was so horrible. It was while I was walking to get onto the plane to take me to the start on day one, and I could feel that my thighs had started to chafe. I'd also gained like 20 or 25 pounds for the expedition. So it was just, I was in like a little bit of a different body than I was used to. And I was like, God damn, if my thighs are chafing right now and I have 2 months of skiing ahead of me. So by the end of day one of skiing, I was like, well, I have a chafing problem. And I only had so much KT tape. Like, I didn't think I was going to need to have my thighs taped the entire time. And then I also experienced something called polar thigh, which is a polar expedition specific medical thing that happens. And there's really very little information, like almost none, about what it is. Doctors don't know what it is, don't know what causes it, and are experimenting with how to treat it. But it basically comes up as sort of hives in the beginning on your you can get it anywhere, but it's very common on your thighs, anywhere where you kind of have fat. So it starts as hives, and then it progresses to having like a sort of blister on it, and then it opens and becomes an open sore, and it will just progressively get worse and worse, and it will not start to heal until you're back in a warm environment. It's just from being out in the cold so long, it just will get worse, and injuries like that have trouble healing in extreme cold situations. So I had gotten polar thigh on the Greenland crossing as well. I knew I was probably going to get it. And on day 7 in the South Pole in Antarctica, I start to see signs of polar thigh. So one of the ways to try to slow down the polar thigh is you try to keep the area, for me it was my thighs, as warm as possible. So I was wearing a down jacket, kind of like a skirt. I was putting on double base layers, trying to keep it as warm. The side effect of keeping my thighs as warm as possible is that I essentially gave myself swamp butt. My crotch was like Florida. My crotch was so warm. It had its own tropical area code. And it was then all of the things that come with warmth and too much warmth were happening down there. So I was chafing more than I should have. It was like my skin was melting off at certain points. My butt cheeks were chafing to get like anything that touched something else was chafing. And then I was also getting a fungal infection down there. I named my fungus Fiona. Fiona was very happy down there. Fiona with her 65 million children. And I just had to deal with that from day 1 of the expedition. And by day 30 or day 35, I was out of fungal cream and I was out of KT tape. And I had access to medics who I would talk to and update them on my situation. And they had me start taking antibiotics because they were worried about the infection. And they were sort of erring on the side of caution and being like, if you start having a fever, if you have these things, like you should maybe come off the expedition. And I was like, there's no fucking way I'm coming off the expedition. Like I of course would have told them if I had a fever, but I also didn't. But it's also funny because they're like, how are you feeling? I'm like, well, I've been skiing for 11 hours a day for 35 days. You know, I'm tired. Like, I don't know how I feel. I don't know what is normal to feel. They're like, do you have a fever? I was like, I don't know. No, I don't know. It's like negative 30 degrees out. I have no idea. But yeah, so there were moments like that where I was like, wow, is this infection going to become something really bad? And is that going to be something where I'm like sick inside my tent, unable to keep going? I'm so happy that it didn't get to that point. But what was wonderful to see and to know was that while my misery was absolute at some points, I never dipped down into like actually wanting to quit. I never entertained that thought. I wanted to finish. I wanted it to be over, but I wanted it to be over by crossing the finish line. I didn't want it to be over by getting extracted or, having them come pick me up and ending it early. But I was so truly miserable at moments on it, but I still knew I did not want to be anywhere else. And I have videos of me. I did a video diary. I have videos of me absolutely sobbing, saying, I want this to be over. I'm so unhappy, but I am also so happy I'm here.
I got to ask, because you have this way of, putting a positive spin on hardships. And you've mentioned, the sayings that you would tell yourself. What other things helped you or kept you entertained or engaged in those 57 days alone out there?
One of the most important things that I did for myself was I had voice notes from friends and family with me. I had reached out to my friends and family before being like, hey, if you're up for it, could you send me a note? Like, I was like, you can pick a day you want me to listen to it. I was out there for a lot of holidays, like Thanksgiving, my birthday, Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's. There was a lot of things that people could choose, or it was like just, pick anything. So that was wonderful. I could listen to those and they were really uplifting and helpful. And sometimes it would just take my mind off of things. I had also made voice notes for myself throughout my training. And I had to be careful when I listened to those because they would get me crying so hard that I had to be like, okay, do I want to listen to, because I had some voice notes for myself from when I was like, pulling tires, and it would be like, my voice note would me being like, okay, I pulled tires for, 3 hours today. I was in the rain. It was so hard. And like, I'm sure your future Monet going through a really hard time right now. And like, just my past self rooting on my future self was so, I don't know. It gives me chills even now to be like, the support from myself. I sound like a narcissist. No, the support from myself was just to see my past self as like someone else who believed in me and was putting in all that hard work, reminded me how much hard work I had put in to reach that point and how there was, how I really did want to be there, that I had chosen to be there, that I'd put a ton of work and I'd put a lot of, I'd put a ton of money, time, and effort into being there, and that I was achieving this massive goal. I was just so deep in it at that point that sometimes it was hard to see out of the misery. And those voice notes and things helped me be like, oh yeah, I'm doing something really hard. That's why I'm miserable.
Oh, I love that. You got the support from your friends and family with voice notes, but doing it yourself to help you through those hardships is incredible. Now, Monet, one thing that I did enjoy reading from researching your expedition, and I knew instantly once I read it that I had to ask you about it, because anybody that's listened to the podcast knows I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan, and you named your tent the Shire. Can you share with our listeners how that name came to be?
Yes. Okay, well, there's multiple levels to it. At one point, I thought I was going to name every single piece of equipment that I had after characters from Lord of the Rings. There's two aspects to it. One is that when I was out in Norway doing my solo, I was out for 2 weeks alone. That was the longest I'd been out alone. I had an epiphany on like day 12 or something that I wanted my alter ego when I'm out in the wild to be Gandalf. That is who I want to be when I'm out in the wild. Like, if I could pick someone to aspire to, it would be like, I want to be the person, like when you are with Gandalf, I imagine, you always feel like safe, like he has the answers, and that like no matter what the situation comes, Gandalf can deal with it. And he's quirky and funny and he makes jokes. I felt like Gandalf is my alter ego outside in the wilderness that I aspire to. I probably end up somewhere closer to Frodo or something like that, but I aspire to Gandalf. And so I was also thinking about a really big important part out on the expedition that people had said to me, and that was one of like my tenets of rules that I'd made for myself heading into the expedition, was that your tent has to be a haven for you. Your tent is your only respite from the cold, from, the intensity of the expedition. And so it has to be at the end of every single day, you want to let your tent be a sanctuary for you. So for me, I was like, it's the Shire to the hobbits, they're on this expedition. The hobbits are on their expedition. They, are dreaming of home and of getting to home back at some point. And like, I wanted the tent, which was also green. So it was, like the Shire. I wanted it to be that place for me, that sanctuary where when I was in it, I would feel safe and like everything was okay. And that was what it felt like on the expedition. If I could make it into my tent at the end of the day, then the day couldn't have been that bad. And my mom actually, we had sew snow flaps onto the edge of my tent when I pile snow onto that when I'm camping at night. And she had gotten these letters to spell out the Shire on the flap right in front of my tent door. So I saw it every single night when I set up my tent and every single morning when I broke it down, the Shire and they lasted throughout the entire expedition. I thought they were going to fall off, but it was just like such a good reminder. And it was true. And it came true. It really worked.
Oh, I love that story. That's beautiful. Now, anytime I see you, I'm going to think of Gandalf, just so you know.
I am honored. And you know what? I do kind of look like Gandalf at the end of expeditions. I have long, straggly hair, which is, I get more gray hairs after every expedition. And I probably smell like him too. No offense to Gandalf. And I have a beard.
Now, Monet, one thing I know our listeners would love to hear is, for a lot of us that do backpacking, finding the appropriate meals and food and calories on backpacking trips is hard enough. But on your expedition, you were burning about 7,000 calories a day. Can you share what you were eating and how frequently did you need to replenish those calories on your expedition?
Oh, yeah. The food is really important. And I put a lot of effort into my rations for the South Pole, partially because I was really trying to cheat the system. Because when you're eating, people know with through hiking and stuff like that, when you have to eat so much, you can get really sick of what you're eating if you're eating the same thing every single day. But so essentially, this is what I did. And spoiler alert, it didn't work. I still got sick of everything I had to eat. But I've tried really hard to have as much variety in my food as possible. I aimed for about 5,200 calories a day. That was too high. I really can only eat about 4,800 calories a day. You think I'll bring more food and I will be able to eat it, but there's a limit, and mine is 4,800, I think. But I would have oatmeal for breakfast, oatmeal that had extra butter in it, and then, milk powder and sugar and stuff. I would have coffee with butter in it as well. And then when I was skiing, I would ski 80-minute pushes. So I'd ski for 80 minutes. I would have a break for about 10 minutes or as short as I could make it. And then I would eat another 200, 250, maybe 300 calories during that break. So that would be any candy bar you can think of, I brought it, plus nuts, cheese, I had Ritz crackers that were completely destroyed. Every single package was crumbs by the time I got to it, but that was fine. They were still delicious. I love sour candy. I wish I could bring more sour candy, but I had to focus on calorie dense things. And unfortunately, gummy candy is not very calorie dense. So I had maybe 100 calories of gummy candy, sour candy a day. And then at night, when I got into my tent, I would have hot chocolate with butter in it or apple cider with butter in it. I called that butter beer. And then I would have ramen first thing when I got into the tent every single night. Never got sick of that, with hot sauce, of course. And then I had Peak Refuel as my dehydrated meals, which I've tried a bunch of them. Peak, to me, are the highest quality. And I am not getting paid to say that. I asked them for sponsorship many times and they rejected me constantly. And I still will tell you that they have the best meals. They're really high calorie. It's 1,000 calories higher than some other ones. Yeah, and that would be it. That would get me to around 5,000 calories a day.
I'm wondering, is there anything as of right now where you're I'm good on that meal or on that snack for the considerable future?
Honestly, the candy bars. I haven't eaten chocolate, candy bars, the gummy candies, thank God I haven't been turned off those. I can still eat those. This happened when I crossed Greenland, but I royally fucked up my rations. And I just sort of thought, okay, meat sticks are great. I can eat one meat stick a day. I'll bring 30 meat sticks. And then I was actually, I can bring 2 meat sticks. I can eat 2 meat sticks a day. Who couldn't eat 2 meat sticks a day? I'll bring 2 meat sticks a day. I somehow ended up with 80 meat sticks in my rations, which is way too many. And so I have never been able to look at a meat stick ever again after Greenland. And I didn't bring any meat sticks to Antarctica. And I'm very happy with that decision.
Now, Monet, let's take our listeners to January 18th, 2026. You finally reached the South Pole. What did that moment feel like?
Surreal. I had been pushing really hard to finish because I basically throughout the expedition skied through 10 degrees of latitude. So I started just before the 80th degree, and then the South Pole is at 90. So the last degree, the 89th degree, I didn't realize at the time, but most people take 5 days to finish the last degree. And I thought I was just ready to be done. So I said, I'm going to do it in 4, thinking that might be a normal amount of time to do it in. Instead, it meant that I was going to ski. At that point, I was so tired, so exhausted. I couldn't ski faster. So I just sort of had one gear at that point. And it meant that I had to ski longer hours in order to go further. So I ended up skiing 12 to 15 hours a day for those last 4 days, just pushing myself to try to get the miles so that I could finish on January 18th, which is the day I decided in my stubborn little mind that I would be finishing. We had 3 glorious days of weather. The weather was freezing. It was negative 40 degrees, but there was no wind and blue skies. And so I was like lapping up all that ski time. And it's the sun never sets in Antarctica during the summer. So you can just feel like you can keep going forever. So I was skiing these really long days. And then on that last day where I was like, okay, I was 14 nautical miles. So that's about 16-ish miles, statute miles from the South Pole. I wake up on the last day and it's a whiteout. And I was like, argh. Antarctica is not going to let me go easy. So with the whiteout, like I explained before, it really slows you down because you can't see where you're going. So I could not let myself think today's going to be the last day. I couldn't risk that my body would let go. Like I didn't know what was going to happen to my body when I finished and I finally stopped. I had been in that mindset, for 57 days, I'd been in this expedition mindset of I will do whatever it takes. I will ski as long as it takes, however many days it takes, one foot in front of the other to get to the South Pole. And I just didn't know what was going to happen once I got out of that mindset. So I was like, I cannot think that today's going to be my last day, even though I really want it to be, especially that it's a whiteout, anything could happen. So after I had been skiing for like 6 hours or so, the clouds lifted and I saw these black little squares on the horizon, and it was buildings. It was the buildings of the South Pole. And I had not seen a building in 2 months. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can see them. I'm going to make it today. I'm just going to ski until I make it, and I will make it today. Then the clouds came back in and I was in a whiteout for another 6 hours. But I did, eventually I could see the buildings even with the whiteout. And then there were like tracks of other people. And the crazy thing is the South Pole is 100% the ugliest part of the expedition. The previous 57 days, it's pristine wilderness, white as far as the eye can see, the snow and everything. And then you reach the South Pole and it looks like a construction site. It's like a construction site at the bottom of the world. There's the Amundsen Scott Research Base, which looks like a fortress. And then there's sort of all these winterized vehicles and tents around and sciencey looking things. And it really looks like, and there's like big tire tracks and there's just so much evidence of humans around. I couldn't see any humans because it was the whiteout. Everyone was indoors. It's negative 40 something degrees out. It's so cold. But I really felt like I was like entering the back entrance of the South Pole. I was like, this has got to be the right place, but it doesn't feel like the right place. And then all of a sudden there was a tent up ahead and people were coming out of it and I could recognize a fellow expeditioner I'd seen 2 months ago, and I saw her jacket and I was like, oh my God, that is Andy. Those are people. Those humans are waiting for me. And then right beyond them were the flags of the ceremonial South Pole. Those last couple of minutes, I was like, oh my God, like it's happening. I'm going to reach it. And then you reach it and it's so surreal. It's like the expedition felt absolutely endless and then it just ends. And it's like, how can that be possible? It felt endless up until, 20 minutes ago. It felt like I was never going to make it. And now I'm here and it's just over. And all of a sudden it's like I'm sitting in a chair for the first time in 2 months. Someone's handing me like a glass of water. Someone was like, do you want wine? I was like, do I? I don't know. Do I want wine? What happens if I drink wine? Oh, it's like there was a chef at the South Pole who was like making me a meal and stuff. It was overwhelming.
Was there a moment, whether it was there that night or maybe a few days later, where it really sank in that you had become the first American woman to complete it solo and unsupported?
No. It has never sunk in. It feels like someone else did the expedition. It feels like Gandalf did the expedition, and I'm telling Gandalf's story because it's just like, it's so wild. It's like my body, I don't know, maybe it's like because it's like kind of like a trauma. My body has just separated from it, or like my mind has separated from it. And it's like someone else did that. I feel like I'm the same person from 4 months ago. Like, how can I be the same person from 4 months ago if I just did that crazy thing? But it did happen. I'm not lying. It definitely did. I'm pretty 99% positive it did happen.
And, you've mentioned the incredible support team that you had help you reach, accomplish this expedition. And I know there was a lot of people that believed in you. But then, we were talking about this. The internet has those trolls. And there are people that tend to question people that do expeditions or maybe that are through hiking or backpacking solo. How did you handle those negative comments or feedback that you were getting from folks?
Mostly you just have to laugh at it. I mean, I try to think about who, first of all, maybe it's a bot, but if this is actually a real human being writing these comments, what do you think they're doing with their life right now? What do you think? They must be deeply unhappy if they see someone celebrating an accomplishment like that and their first instinct is to comment being how did you get a visa to go to Antarctica? Or whatever it is, I thought only military were allowed there. Yeah, I mean, there are people who have said it's fake. There are people who have said, but it's just noise. Honestly, it's just noise. And there's so many more people who have been so excited and congratulating me. And even that stuff is its own kind of noise, really early on in my social media career, I was upset about a post not doing well. And I'd sort of said to my brother, oh, well, I just have to remember that it's not my fault if something doesn't go well most of the time. It's you just have to not be connected to it. And he said to me, he was like, that's super true. But that also means when it does well, you have to disconnect from it too. It doesn't mean something special about you when it does well. And he was so right. And I've really taken that to heart. It's almost all of it is noise. Both the good stuff, there's the stuff that I am really excited about. It's the connections I've made with people that has existed offline, I've met people because I also organize and lead my own group trips and people join it because of my social media, but I've made actual friendships from those group trips. And those people, the people in my life who are rooting me on and have been for years, that's the kind of stuff that's not noise.
And I'm glad you brought up the group trips because you've built these immersive travel experiences. I think a few of them are summiting Mount Kenya at sunrise, riding e-bikes through the Barana Conservancy, sailing in Portugal, food-focused trips in, beautiful Sicily and Greenland. How does guiding others compare to being completely alone on the ice?
I think for me, what I love about those trips is I think they're fun. For me, they're 100% pure fun. But I know that for some of the people who come on them, it's their first time camping or it's their first time, sleeping on a boat. And I love when people push a little bit outside of their comfort zone and the benefit that I see in their faces and the good time that they're having from, having an adventure like that. That for me is super rewarding and just super fun. I know people are wait, you sound really intense and you also run group trips, but I can't go, I don't want to ski to the South Pole. I don't want to lead a group to the South Pole. I promise you that. I can barely take care of myself in Antarctica. I cannot take care of others. But yeah, the group trips are for me, it's pure fun. And there's moments on it that I think most people will come and there'll be something that they're trying for the first time. I just find that really rewarding to be with people and that people trust me to do something for the first time like that.
And I know we're still at the beginning stages of 2026, Monet, but is there any upcoming trips that people can look out for here in 2026?
For my year, I am I'm not doing anything hardcore. I'm just going on fun trips for the rest of the year. That's my plan. I mean, it's March, so who knows? I might change my mind. But yeah, so I just have group trips planned for the rest of the year. We are going to Greenland in July. There's a 10-day Arctic summer experience where we're led by Tobias, a Greenlandic hunter, into the Arctic Circle, which is super cool. And we camp on icebergs and things like that. It's awesome. And then we have 2 food-obsessed sailing trips in Portugal in August. We spend a week at a working olive farm in Sicily in September. And then after that, I don't know. There might be another trip in Nepal at the end of the year, but we'll see.
And for folks that are interested in learning more about these trips, where are some of the places they can find more information on?
Ooh, come talk to me on Instagram, or you can go to my Substack, which is called How to Be a Polar Explorer. I post about trips there, or my website, monetizabeth.com.
Awesome. And we'll be sure to put those in the episode show notes. Monet, I'm really glad that you brought up Tobias, because one of the posts that really caught our attention was you were following polar bear tracks, I believe, with Tobias. And I've seen grizzlies, and grizzlies are just huge and massive, and polar bears are, dwarf grizzlies. What was that moment like? Seeing those polar bear tracks across the Arctic and tracking one of the most powerful predators on Earth.
That was incredible. I mean, that was everything about Greenland is just jaw-dropping, awe-inspiring. Like from the Inuit culture to the mountains and to the polar bears. We didn't actually see a polar bear on that trip, and that was part of that group trip. That was on a group trip that we were doing the tracking of the polar bear. But polar bears exist and sort of play in that area. And Tobias is a really famous East Greenlandic hunter who leads us around on the trip. And so he knows, like, he would never put us in harm's way. So he knew that those tracks were old enough. It was safe for us to be standing on the ice and walking. I knew that. Everyone else knew that too. So there wasn't a reason to be afraid, like that a polar bear was going to jump out, because no one wants that to happen. But you see those footprints, those paw prints, they are huge. They are the size of my head. And even though you know that like we're not in harm's way, you get that tingly feeling of like, oh my God, if its foot is that big, can you even imagine how big the rest of it is? I mean, it's really just, especially on the like in Greenland, nature is everywhere and is so like such a part of everyday life. And especially on that trip, like we're so immersed in the fjords and the icebergs and like fishing with Tobias. It's just like, it's such an immersive experience in the nature and with people who hold the nature in such high regard and know it so deeply. It's jaw-dropping.
So listen up, listeners. If you want to have a similar experience, check out Monet's upcoming trips and see if you can snag a spot. Monet, we're getting to the end of the regular questions, but I did want to ask you, you called the expedition No Reservations, and I'm wondering if you could share with listeners what that phrase means to you now.
So originally, I made it for sort of two different reasons. One of which is that Anthony Bourdain has always been a massive inspiration to me from the very beginning of my career. And I was delusional to be like, I'm going to meet him someday. Of course, now that's never going to happen, which makes me very sad. But I've always resonated with, the work that he put out into the world, and the way that I approach travel and my group trips is heavily inspired by him. And then leading up to my expedition, there was a moment when I almost didn't qualify for the South Pole for the expedition. I had to qualify through a company that would be handling my logistics and my safety. They basically had to approve that I was ready. And I'd been working with them closely for the 3 years leading up to the expedition to make sure that my training was in line with what they wanted me to be doing, so that I wouldn't run into a situation where I was surprised by their result or by their evaluation of me. But because of things completely out of my control, when they came time to evaluate me 4 or 5 months before the expedition was set to begin, they came back to me saying that they had some reservations about my abilities. And it was just one of those moments where like the fate of the expedition suddenly hung in the balance, and I had what felt like zero control over it. I'd done my training. There was no time left to do any more training before the November expedition would begin. And it just became one of those moments where I had to prove myself by getting the people who had helped me throughout the previous 3 years and who cared about me, reaching out to those contacts and being like, hey, will you write a recommendation for me? Will you call them? Will you let them know that you vouch for me, like what your experience was? And the people around me really rallied for me and came to bat for me and proved to them that, she's ready. She did this, she did that. We are people who have been in these experiences before, and we know that she can handle it. And so it was after all of that when my expedition was then officially approved, I decided to officially name it No Reservations. And for me, it was just when you do these things, when you do take on these really big goals, you have to be the person who believes in it the most. And you can't have reservations about your abilities or about completing it. Before I even started, like before day one of the expedition, I would have like what I can only consider as like visions of me reaching the South Pole. It felt so real that it felt as if I had already accomplished my goal in a way that was like I could see myself arriving at the South Pole and completing the expedition. And it felt so real to me that it was like, I just got to go out there and not stop. I just got to keep going and it will happen, which is what did happen. It's like, I guess visualization works, but I wasn't even trying. It was like eyes wide open hallucinations that I would have about completing the expedition.
Monet, you're a true inspiration. And I think, the way that you approached this expedition, I think translates to all avenues of life. The mindset work that you did to prepare for this, I think applies to, almost everyday life. You don't have to necessarily do, expeditions, because I think there is this, fear-based, not focus, but I think when you're doing things solo, especially, I feel like people project their own fears and concerns on you. And one thing that I'm trying to do when I hear about people doing solo adventures is, instead of saying be safe, say like have a fun time, enjoy yourself. And I think the mindset work that you did and the experience that you've shared will resonate with a lot of folks. And I think it's just taking that first step and just sending it like you did.
100%. And be scared. It's okay to be scared. I was scared, in my training, I was scared a lot of the time. And then it's okay. Like that means your nervous system is working and your checks and balances are firing away. And just don't let it make the decisions for you.
Now, Monet, these last couple questions that we like to ask our guests are new for this season. We had some standard ones that we had been using for the last couple seasons, but we did do a couple updates. So I'm interested in hearing your responses to these. But for you, do you have a pre-hike or pre-ski ritual, or maybe a first mile mindset?
I definitely don't have a ritual per se, but I would say my first mile mindset is that nothing in the first mile counts. Like any thoughts you have, like it doesn't matter how you're feeling in the first mile. You just have to let it go, because it doesn't mean anything about the rest of the miles that are going to come.
Now, I'm curious if you could share, this is going to be a two-part question. What's your go-to post-hike ski meal or drink? And what was it in Antarctica?
Okay. French fries is post-hike. 100% French fries, especially if anyone goes like tea house trekking in Nepal, French fries. And then in Antarctica, ramen. Oh my gosh, my ramen was sacred to me every single day. It was the meal I never got tired of. It was the first thing I had when I got in the tent, and it was just like soul-filling, my ramen.
Now, you've been able to try on multiple pieces of gear over thousands of miles. What's the one piece of gear you'll never compromise on?
If we're talking polar stuff, I would say sleeping bag. Prior to this expedition, I had gone for a 2-bag system where I had a synthetic bag on the outside and a down bag on the inside. Put together, it was sort of supposed to be warm enough. I did that because I was trying to save money. It was not warm enough. I was very cold in Norway. I was so lucky after hounding Western Mountaineering that they sent me their Bison Storm Shield -40-degree sleeping bag, and they even put an extra filling for me for the expedition. It was the most amazing thing ever on the expedition. I started calling this my sleeping bag my boyfriend. I was saying inappropriate things to it. It was amazing. That thing will come with me wherever I go.
Now, Monet, on the flip side, what's the most overrated piece of outdoor gear?
Okay, I'm going to answer this. It's not exactly that it's it's not that it's overrated, but I think that we've put too much hype into using trail runners instead of hiking shoes. And I know this is a very individualistic thing. So for me and my feet and anyone else there who's feeling the same way, I have tried using trail runners instead of hiking boots, and all I've gotten for it are blisters and pain. I am a hiking boot girl, and that is the hill that I will die on. And for anyone else there who doesn't feel seen by the trail running shoe community, I feel you.
I've noticed doing this podcast, there's been a big shift in boots to trail runners over the last couple of years. And, I think I've gone through at least 6 to 8 different pairs of boots and trail runners and still haven't found the right pair for me. Hopefully this year I find something that helps me out.
What boots are you using now?
I'm using the Hoka Anacappas, but they're a little too narrow and they're a little too warm during the summer months. Honestly, and this is going to be a hot take, but my favorite hybrids were the Adidas Terex boots. They were lightweight. They had the ankle support. They had the cushion, but that was like 3 or 4 years ago. And the updates that they've done to the model now, it's just not the same.
They ruined a good thing.
I feel like that's unfortunately with a lot of shoe brands lately. They've changed it. They try to change the materials and ends up hurting the shoe itself. Now, the last question I wanted to ask you, Monet, is has there ever been a moment where you turned around short of a summit or maybe a goal? And what did it teach you?
I'm sure that there's been times where I've, stopped doing a goal, but it just feels like I think I reframe those in my mind as just like a rerouting along the road of the next, whatever goal I ended up doing. The first time that I climbed Mount Kenya, I was doing the Point Lenana summit. So there's multiple summits and the highest ones are technical. You have to do technical climbing to reach, but I was doing the lower one. That was the highest mount that I'd ever climbed. And I was going up there with a mountain guide named John Kamau, who is also on our team when we go up to the plane crash on Mount Kenya. And so I knew him very, very well. And because I was dumb, I was sort of just like, I would like to climb Mount Kenya. Let's just do it next time that I'm there. And I didn't really think about taking Diamox or the altitude or anything. I hadn't taken any Diamox. The altitude hit me hard and I was struggling. John has a lot of experience on the mountain. He's been guiding on the mountain for like 35, 40 years or something crazy like that. I was going really slowly. And at one point, I could see the summit. And I was like, you know what, John? This is fine. I don't need to go any higher. I can see it. It's right there. I'm sure it's pretty much the same as where I am right now. We can just turn around. And John was like quiet for a minute. And then he's like, okay. When you come back next year, we'll do it again, and then we'll reach the summit. And I was like, God damn it. He's not going to let me go without going up there. And so we did. I pushed. It took another hour and a half to go the 5 feet to the summit, and we made it. And since then, I've climbed it again with Diamox, and I had a much easier time. But it's funny because I'm actually someone who wants people to not care as much about the summit. I would much prefer people don't put so many eggs in the basket of reaching the summit. And it's not that I wish that I'd turned around, but I wouldn't feel bad now if I told you that I'd turned around. I think it is pretty much like reaching the summit where I was at. I think that there is value. It wasn't about the summit, but I do think there's value in learning how much you can actually, that you can push beyond what you think you can push. I do think there's value in that, but I don't think necessarily that we should care so much about bagging summits or things like that, But I do believe in the value of pushing yourself and of learning that you actually have, and this is what I've learned throughout the polar expeditions and other hikes that I've been on, I have a well of strength within me that I still have not found the bottom of. And those are the kind of moments where you reach into that well and realize you haven't hit the bottom yet. And I think that's really important lessons to learn. I don't think the summit was that different from where I was actually sitting.
Oh, I love that. The well of strength that you're able to pull from. Yeah, sometimes you just need that little extra push to realize that you could do it. But
yeah, we all need that. But also at the same time, if you don't want to go to the summit, don't go to the summit. Doesn't matter. Just have a good time.
Now, Monet, you did mention your upcoming 2026 group hikes, but is there anything else on the horizon for this year that for you personally you're looking forward to?
I'm going to write a book about training for the South Pole and the expedition. That is what I'm really going to focus my time and energy on for the rest of the year, is that I want to write a book before I move on to another expedition, which I sort of have tiny little inklings about what it might be, but I'm trying not to decide anything yet.
Oh, well, I'm looking forward to when the book comes out and reading more about your experience down in the South Pole. Well, Monet, that was it for the regular questions. This last section is the this or that questions. We have some new ones for season 14. I'm going to give you some hiking and outdoor related topics, and you just choose which one you prefer out of the two, but you're more than welcome to say both or neither. But the first one is dense forests or wide open views?
Wide open views. Oh my gosh, the green tunnel of the East Coast is not my favorite. Wide open views. If I am doing a 7-day hike and I'm meeting day hikers on that hike, I'm going to be pissed, which is what happened when I did like part of the long trail in Vermont. I want to if I'm hiking for 7 days, you have to take a helicopter to get there. That's what I'm aiming for. And I want a good view. I feel really strongly about that one.
And this one we kind of touched based on a little bit already, but peak bagging or wandering miles?
Wandering miles. Wander.
Now, this one's going to be a tough one. This one's a new one for season 14. Cabin stay or tent camping, if you had a choice?
That is tough. Oof, I love a good cabin. But the tent... I would say that, I really want to encourage people that you don't have to be super hardcore in everything that you do, which is also a lesson that I am learning. I tend to sometimes jump to I've never winter camped. I'll go out for a week alone, Would have been smarter to just go for 1 night or 2 nights. Anyway, one of my favorite ways of hiking is the tea house trekking in Nepal. I actually split my time between Kathmandu and the US. And I mean, it's so lovely to have a beautiful trek all day and then have a hot meal cooked for you by someone else. There's a lot to be said for that.
Now, this next one's going to be hard, Monet, because these two, I think both hikers, backpackers, and anybody that enjoys the outdoors do not like, but bug bites or blisters.
I would take bug bites over blisters because I'm a little bit allergic to bug bites. And so since I was a child, I get monster mosquito bites. And I've just been used to it. And that's just my daily life. But I hate blisters.
This is going to be a controversial one for season 14, but I feel like a lot of backpackers and especially through hikers, in order to get through some of the miles, they like to put an earbud in and listen to a podcast or music. But for you, do you prefer music on the trail or nature sounds only?
Oh, it depends. Oh, that's hard. For me, it depends on how long my hike is. I'm going to be tricky and split it into, if I'm on a long distance multi-day thing, and part of it is a little bit of a grind, pushing through those tougher times where you're I don't feel like hiking today, but I have to anyway because I'm doing blah, blah, blah. I will listen to an audiobook or I will throw on some music. If it's a day hike, I would normally go for mountain sounds, I would normally not have headphones, or if there's a risk of animals or bears or something being around and I had to stay more alert. But if I'm having a rough day and I just want to be out there moving my body, I will do whatever it takes. And sometimes that means I need to have a playlist or have that good book out there. No harm in that.
Now, this next one we've already touched base on, trail runners or hiking boots?
Hiking boots. Hiking boots forever.
Now, in my research of trying to find the right footwear for myself, I started noticing a thing with brands, and that's whether they have a Vibram or Vibram sole outsole, or it's their house brand outsole. If you had to choose between the outsoles, would you have a preference between the Vibram or the brand name?
Well, so I hike in Merrill hiking boots, and they do have the Vibram sole. So I gotta go with that because that's what I'm using already. But I'm also the worst gear person ever because I will just be oh, I need new hiking boots. These seem fine. And then I wear them. And then for me, I'm my hot take is that most gear functions fine. That's my hot take. And people find it fun to test and find the things that work for them. I think they should, of course, do that. But for me, it's normally I'm in places where it's hard to get gear. And a lot of times I just sort of have to deal with what I can get my hands on and then make it work. And honestly, most gear works fine.
Now, this next one, I'm interested because you've experienced both of these conditions in multiple expeditions and adventures. But if you had to choose between these two, would you choose a windy summit or a cloudy summit?
Ooh, windy. I want those views. I summited Mount Olympus in clouds, and I would have preferred wind.
Because at least with the wind, hopefully it would blow away the clouds, right?
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's still safe to be up there with psycho winds or whatever, I would take winds and hopefully have a clear view. It is like, as much as, of course, it's like not about the peak, it's not about the views. I love a view. And when I don't have a view, it is a little bit of a bummer sometimes. But you gotta, we are guests of the mountain, and you take what it gives you and you're happy for it.
This next one's going to be another tough one, I think, for this season. But if you had to choose, would you choose a national park or a hidden gem?
Hidden gem, hidden gem, hidden gem. Definitely hidden gem. My experience, I've been to some national parks. I haven't been to a ton, but I'm always wary of, it can sort of kind of feel like amusement parky in some of the ones that I've been in, even when it's so beautiful. I went to Arches and it was incredible. I always sort of feeling like I'm off the path more so than on it.
This next one's going to be tough, I think, especially being based out of the East Coast, but spring wildflowers or fall colors?
Fall colors. Fall colors. I'm often not in New England during the fall because it's more peak season in Nepal for group trips, and I miss fall when I'm not here. I got to experience fall last year because I was heading towards Antarctica in November, and it was just such a treat. It's so beautiful when the colors change.
I still got to make it out there during the fall foliage season.
It's so nice. And maple syrup on everything.
Oh, for sure. Now, Monet, the last one is a new one, but if you had to choose, would you choose type 1 fun or type 2 fun?
Well, my track record shows that I choose type Z fun, which is that it's never fun and I will not call it fun. No. Oh, yeah, I am against my will, a type 2 fun kind of person nowadays. But I think that's more because for me, type 1 fun is sitting on a couch reading a book. And I do that a lot. So if we were to weigh the hours of how much I'm sitting on a couch reading a book and how much I'm out doing type 2 fun, I probably read more than I do the type 2 fun, even though I do a lot of type 2 fun. Ooh, I can't answer that one. I think it's 50-50. You need balance in your life, and I refuse.
I like that. I like that response. Well, Monet, that was it for the This or That questions. It has been a blast speaking with you and learning more about your expedition. But for folks that are wanting to learn more, not just about your expedition, but be able to look at your social media, group projects, or group hikes, I should say, as well as any other online resources, where are some of the best places they can find you at?
You can find me on Instagram at monet.izabeth, or my website, monetizabeth.com, or my Substack, which is called How to Be a Polar Explorer.
And we'll be sure to put those in the episode show notes so people can check it out.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so much fun.
Yeah, it has been a blast speaking with you. And I can't wait to see what 2026 has to offer for you and your group expeditions. And I can't wait to see what seeds been planted and what's going to come to fruition in the coming years.
Me neither. Who knows? Who knows what I'll get up to?
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Monet. We extend a heartfelt thanks to her for joining us on the podcast. Be sure to follow her on Instagram at monet.izabeth. And for more, be sure to check out the episode show notes. This episode of Hikes and Mics was produced by Jordan Smith. Be sure to follow her adventures on Instagram at jordan.journeys. New episodes will drop every Monday throughout the spring hiking season, with the occasional Friday bonus episode along the way. To make sure you never miss a moment of these inspiring trail stories, hit that follow or subscribe button. Your support truly keeps this community moving forward, one episode at a time. Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. That's where you'll find behind-the-scenes episode visuals, my own spring hiking adventures, and plenty more to keep that fresh air stoke alive as the season heats up. As we wrap up today's journey, remember, the trails are waking up, the wildflowers are on their way, and there's never been a better time to get out there and explore. So tread those happy trails, soak in the sunshine, and keep chasing what's just around that next bend. Until next time, my fellow hikers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow along with him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade, it's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, ursaminoutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, ursaminoutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.